When I was growing up, I had someone in my life that was incredibly influential. I have a picture of him right here. His name is Mike Broughton. He was easily the most influential man in my life, without question. Some of you know I didn't have a dad when I was growing up. I didn't have a father around. And so he, in many ways, filled that void. And he's the reason why I'm here today, standing and doing what I'm doing. He's the reason why I really wanted to seriously consider Christianity, why I wanted to have a family. Just the example that he set for me was amazing. But in a similar way that he was great at these other things, he was also an incredible coach, incredible basketball coach. He's actually in the Indiana Basketball Hall of Fame for coaching. He was an assistant coach at the University of Nebraska as well, and then he went on down to Southern Nazarene University in Oklahoma, was a head coach there. He'll probably end up in their Hall of Fame as well one day. He won more games in the 1990s than any other coach in the state of Indiana, and we were the most successful high school program in the state through that time. And a lot of it was attributed to his just ability to coach us up. And he had an incredible knack for getting us fired up leading into games. He had this locker room speech. It always had the same format. The format was simply this: you're not as good as you think you are. They're better than you think you are, but you can still win. Every team we played, no matter how bad they were or how good they were, it didn't matter. You're not as good as you think you are, and he'd look at every one of us and tell us why we were that way. But they're better than you think you are, but that's all right. You can still go out and win. And we'd be like Huns going to attack a village, running out of that locker room, ready to take them on. He just had that ability to motivate us. But he didn't lose that as the games would progress. And in fact, I thought that he actually got better as the games went on. Often in the fourth quarter, we'd find ourselves in huddles, worn out, tired, exhausted. And he would look at us and he'd say, "You got the rest of your life to be tired. Don't be tired now. Don't give up. Don't give in. You can beat them. You're better than you think you are." He'd kind of flip it on us. They're not as good as you think they are, and you can go win. And we'd run out there on the court, and 90% of the time, we won those games. That's just the way that it played out. And it was just that consistent message that he always had to us of not giving up. In a similar way, the writer of Hebrews is encouraging us to not give up. He has this locker room type of speech for us in Hebrews chapter 12, verses 1 through 3 there. And he says these words: "Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. For the joy set before him endured the cross, scorning its shame, sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that they will not grow weary and lose heart." When you read a text like this, you just have to ask yourself exactly, why is this written? Have you ever gotten a text message and not really known what it meant or what was being said or why it was even sent to you? Often they'll have these little abbreviations and you're left saying, well, what exactly does that mean? I came across a text message like that this week. This is a mom writing her son, what does IDKLY and TTYL mean? I don't know, love you, talk to you later. Okay, I'll ask your sister. And so you just got to ask why. Why is this happening? Or a friend will try to be funny and cute with you, and they'll say, like this one here, "I'm hungry." And he wrote the country hungry. "Maybe you should check the fridge." And then they just keep going. I'm rushing to the kitchen. Is there any turkey? It's got a layer of grease on it. Oh, there's no way I can eat that. Please finish this, but I'm having a good time. Or this one here. I really love this one. "What's the lowest that you'll take?" And so it's probably on the Facebook Marketplace or something like that. "Lowest I'll go with 700. 200? Sure, why not?" Now you got to ask yourself, why is he willing to go that low? Okay, where do you want to meet? Gives them an address. Sounds good. "Hey, I'm here." Cool, head inside. Into the comedy club? Yeah. Then head up on the stage and tell your jokes to somebody else. I mean, you got to ask yourself when you get a message like that, why would he be willing to go so low? What was the purpose of this? And very much in a similar way, as you read into this letter of Hebrews, you got to ask, why was this letter being written? What was the purpose of it? The reason that the author of Hebrews wrote the letter to these Hebrews, Christians, is because there was once a time in which they were on fire for Jesus. There was a time when it was easy for them to go to church. There was a time when it was easy for them to read their Bibles. There was a time when it was easy for them to pray. The emotions were all in place. They were in place to the point that they were able to resist persecution to certain degrees against them and still stay strong to their faith. But those days were in the past, and the faith that once was hot is now cold. David De Silva, a biblical historian, scholar, says it this way: the early fervor of these Christians has cooled off, and they have not become mature in their faith. They are in seemingly spiritual danger. A few verses that touch on this. One is in Hebrews chapter 10, verse 25. Let us not give up meeting together, because there were those amongst them who were in the habit of giving up on meeting together. There was a tremendous amount of societal pressure against them to not be a Christian. You see, in this particular time, the Greek gods were the ones who were thought to bring good rain, to bring good crops. When there was peace, to keep the peace. When there was war, to win the battles. It was the gods who made those things happen. And now you have this fringe group that is growing. And the growth is going to compromise the favor they have with the gods. That's societal instability. Not to mention they couldn't worship the emperor. And so now there's societal pressure against these Christians. Pressure that, as some of the texts seem to allude to, led to them having false charges brought against them, led to them certainly having some degrees of persecution, not to the point of shedding blood, but they have dealt with persecution. They have had land confiscated because of their faith. And what did all that lead to? Well, some of them have stopped coming to these meetings. They're not meeting together the way that they once did, because it's not good to be associated with that group. Even if they keep the faith, they're not living out the faith, because it's really compromising them personally. It's kind of a tough situation there that they're writing to. Instead, he says, keep meeting together. Don't give up like some are in the habit of doing, but encourage one another. You need encouragement because it's hard. It's hard to be a Christian. It's hard to really live out your faith. It's hard to forgive. It's hard to care. It's hard to love. It's hard to have joy. It's hard to do these things. It's hard to have those good habits in your life. And all the more as the day is approaching, there's this implication there that it's going to get harder, not easier. And when it gets harder, you're going to need to continue to meet together on a regular basis to stay encouraged, to stay in line with the faith that some of you have had. And so as we go on here, I've got here, it's kind of like this. It's like a picture puzzle. And this is a box of the picture that these pieces come together to create. And I don't know about your home, but my home, we don't have a lot of boxes with puzzles in them. But we do have puzzles. And I have a limit of like 20 pieces of puzzle, because if I don't have the picture, it's not getting put together. It's just not going to happen. So they have to be really big pieces, like 20 is the top limit. When I was younger, I remember I was with my sister, and I would stay with her periodically through the summers, and I went over to a friend's house of hers, and I remember sitting at this table, and this puzzle, it had to have at least 1,000, probably more than that, pieces to it. And I would just sit there and put pieces together for an hour or so, and I have no idea what the puzzle was supposed to create. I never got that far, but because there wasn't a box. I had the pieces, I just didn't have the big picture. That's how life is often. Sometimes we get the big pieces. It doesn't take long, and you can piece things together pretty easily, and you realize, like, oh, that was the purpose, that was the intent, that's why that happened. But these people that this letter is written to, they don't have a big picture. Their property was taken, and they're not getting it back. Their friends, they're not friends anymore, and they probably won't ever be friends again, as long as they keep that faith that they have. They've got some pieces, but they aren't sure how they all come together. And when you don't have the big picture, that's where faith has to come in. It's when you go to the doctor again, but you don't get a diagnosis. It's when you have a relationship, but it doesn't end with a proposal. It's when you go to another interview, but it doesn't get you a call back. It's those kind of situations where you have these pieces, but the big picture is just beyond your comprehension. It's beyond what it is that I can see. And it's in those moments that, right? It's in those moments that it's easy to give up on our faith, to stop living out our faith, to quit allowing our faith to impact our lives the way that we ought to. And so this writer, he writes to these people, and he's wanting to give them this locker room speech. Don't give up. Keep going. I know you're tired. I know you're weary. Hang in there. And so how is it that we are supposed to grow in our faith, to stay strong in our faith? Well, let's go back to the text that we were looking at. He says, therefore. And therefore, anytime in the Bible is a trigger, and you ask what it's there for. Not because there's a deep meaning within therefore per se. It's more to, you ask what it's there for to pause and reflect back on the text that is getting connected, the previous text to the text you're getting ready to read. So it's a trigger to examine the entire context. And the context of chapter 12 is chapter 11, where you have these heroes of faith. You have Abel, and you have Gideon, and you have Abraham, and you have Moses, and you have all of these different people, Samson, and so on and so forth, that did these incredible things, often in spite of persecution, often with just pieces to the puzzle. But as it would go on to say is that they never really saw what was going to come to fruition. They had glimpses of it here and there, but they didn't know exactly how God was going to bring it all together in Jesus. And so he says, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, and I'll come back to that phrase in a moment, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. And I'm going to break some of that down next week. And let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses. He's making reference to those heroes of faith that are referenced in chapter 11. I have a friend of mine who the only reason, in my opinion, he is still a Christian in spite of some of the challenges he's had in life is because of his grandmother's faith. It was pure, it was genuine, it was true. And in his life, she is a hero of faith, and she has encouraged him along again and again and again and again. If you want to hang on to your faith, you got to allow. And that word is very intentional, allow. You got to open your heart, open your mind. You got to allow. Allow your faith to be encouraged by other heroes of faith. Coming back to this text here, this word cloud, it's used two different times, two different ways in the Greek language. One is the white fluffy mass that we'll see floating along in the sky. The other version of cloud, which is used here, is more like a fog. It's this thing that encompasses you, it consumes you, it surrounds you. And what he's saying is that you're surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses, a great crowd of heroes of the faith. This word cloud was often used in reference to settings like this, where there is an incredible orator that is in front of a packed house, a packed stadium, or a play that's taking place. And the crowd that is there, this cloud of witnesses, is encouraging them on, spurring them on, to continue to do a good job, to keep it going. That's what they want. That's often how this word was used. Psychologists have a phrase that's known as pareidolia. It's the mind's ability to see an image where there is none. One of the more popular versions of a pareidolia, you may remember this from the news, was actually an image that somebody saw in a grilled cheese sandwich. Did you remember this? Here, I have a picture of it. See Virgin Mary. She's right there. The Virgin Mary. You laugh. This was sold for $28,000. A pareidolia in a grilled cheese sandwich. The most common pareidolia, though, is an image someone sees in a cloud, in the sky. And what we're being implored to do here is with our mind, with our faith, that in spite of the cloud of issues that we may deal with in life, relational issues and issues of doubt and struggles that we have with certain questions that we can't seemingly get answers to, issues in our families, issues at our work, these things that often challenge us, that push us to the brim where our faith is literally hanging by a thread, that in those moments when you're surrounded by that kind of a cloud, that you would see the faces of heroes of faith that have encouraged you along the way. That's the challenge for us there. We go on in our text here, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. And we'll come back to that in a moment. For the joy that was set before him, so why is it that we should fix our eyes on Jesus? For the joy that was set before him, he endured the cross. We'll come back to that in a moment too. Scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him, we'll come back to that word consider, who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. That word lose heart there, it can be translated to be discouraged, or literally it could mean to lose courage, to lose hope, to not have something to pursue, to not have something to go after. I heard a story of a woman named Tammy Kramer. She worked at this hospital, Los Angeles County Hospital in LA. She worked in the HIV outpatient clinic there. As is often the case in a setting like that, the doctors get a little bit calloused. They don't have quite the bedside manner that you would hope that they would for certain patients that are coming in and going out. Tammy observed one interaction that a doctor had with the patient, and she wrote about it. She said this man came in, he sat at a chair. The doctor came and attended to him, but he never said anything to him when he walked up to him. He just simply administered the medicine, and then as he was administering the shot into the side of his stomach, he said to this man, without even looking at him, that he was treating, "You know you have less than a year to live, right?" And the man kind of nodded, and then the doctor went on to the next patient. And with that, the man's countenance, this patient, it immediately changed. Something was different about him. As he was walking past their desk, Tammy said, "Are you okay?" And he replied back, "That expletive took the only hope I had from me." And Tammy responded and said, "Maybe he did, but if he did, maybe you should find a new hope." If your hope or your faith is in circumstances, and that's often what it is for us, our faith in God is strong if things are easy. If relationships are good, the marriage is strong, if the kids are making A's, if the job situation is peaceful and harmonious, if the anxiety that keeps us up at night is gone, if we're healthy and we're strong, then our faith is good. But the moment those circumstances get pulled out from under us, we realize where our hope's really been placed, where our faith is really at. That's what's happened here with these people that received this letter of Hebrews. They've had these things get swept out from under them. They're discouraged. The faith that was hot is now cold. And so the writer here, he says, this is what you have to do if you're going to keep your faith strong. You have to fixate your eyes on Jesus. Keep your faith fixated on Jesus, not a situation, not a circumstance, not any of these other things that you have going on in your life that you often base your faith on. Instead, base your faith on him. Brandon Burcham and myself, we were speaking with a gentleman in our church named Scott Swindoll, and we were talking about this idea of faith, and he shared with us that one of the challenges that he said I have with my faith is when God doesn't seemingly move as fast as I would like him to. You know, the old adage that God is always on time, but he's never in a hurry, is a very difficult thing for us to wrestle with and to live with, isn't it? It's tough. But that's what we have to live with in faith, that God often doesn't move as quickly as we want. He doesn't often do the things that we want him to do. Galatians chapter 6, verse 9 gives us this encouragement, though. Let us not become weary in doing good. Don't become weary in forgiving. Don't become weary in not working hard. Don't become weary in trying to make it work within your marriage or with your children. Don't become weary in reading your Bible or saying the prayers that you know you need to say. Don't become weary in meeting together like this. Instead, continue to do good for at the proper time. And that's really the hardest part of all this. Wouldn't it be nice if it was more specific? At a month from now or 6 weeks from now or 2 years from now, wouldn't that be nice? It would be, but it doesn't work like that. And if it did work that, it probably wouldn't require the faith that we're being asked to have. I wish I could tell you that in 2 years you would get a positive test result for the pregnancy test. I wish I could tell you in 1 year that you'll meet the person that you've always wanted to marry. I wish I could tell you in 6 months the cancer will go away, and I wish I could tell you in 6 weeks you'll get that great job offer. But all I can tell you is at the proper time, you will reap a harvest if you don't give up. I've spoken with many people that wish that they could go back and change that moment when they gave up. That moment when they gave up on the marriage, or they gave up on a job, or they gave up on their health, or they gave up on a child. And what he's saying is like, just don't give up. You're going to get tired. Let us not become weary in doing good. You're going to get tired. Just don't get tired of doing good. For at the proper time we'll reap a harvest if we do not give up. And what this writer in Hebrews does, though, is as we shift from having a circumstantial faith to really having a Christological faith, is what he's trying to lay out for us is this image that Jesus is greater than the things that we often put our faith in. In Hebrews, this is how it plays out here. Jesus is better than the angels that maybe some of you have put confidence in. He's greater than Abraham, the father of your faith, he would be saying to these people that were Hebrews that have become Christians. He's greater than Moses, the giver of the law. He's greater than the priesthood that so many of you depend on to be your intercessor between God and you. He's greater than the earthly tabernacle that's supposed to represent God's presence, but now God's presence can reside in you. It's greater than the sacrificial system because Jesus was the one once for all sacrifice for all. He's greater than the other heroes of faith because even though they had a great faith, they were still imperfect, flawed people. And you can go back and read the stories of them and find that out and see that there. And if Jesus is greater, if Jesus is better, then that ought to be something that encourages our faith. But do you really believe that? Do you believe that Jesus is better than your addiction? That word compare, another variation of that word is consider. In the text, do you remember where he said, consider him who endured the cross. Consider him who went through what he went through for us. Consider that. And so we ought to compare Jesus. Compare Jesus to your addiction. Isn't he better? Isn't he better than your debt? Isn't he better than your illness? Isn't he better than your boss or your past failures or your future fears or your anxieties? Is Jesus better? And when we can answer that question with a yes, then our faith is in the right place. But when we can answer it with a no or we're not sure, then our faith probably isn't where it's supposed to be. And so we're challenged to fixate ourselves on him and to consider what it is that he did on the cross, to consider what it is that he went through for us. There's a man named John Lee. He ran in a race, ultramarathon. Does anybody know what an ultramarathon is? How many miles is an ultramarathon? Anybody know? Too long, that's right. 150 miles across the Sahara Desert. He ran in this race to raise money for a wife of his who had died 18 months prior of cancer. He said a day into the race, he saw many of the runners fall out. Dehydration, the extreme heat, it was just too much. About 80 miles in, the soles of his shoes exploded from the heat. I didn't even know that was possible. The shoes just exploded. And from there, he continued on despite the difficult circumstances with blisters. Every step, excruciating pain. Finally crossing the finish line. He was asked by a reporter afterwards how he was able to endure and see it through, to not give up. He said he thought of his wife, Allison, a lot. And he said that nothing he had to go through was anything compared to what she had to go through. And the writer of this letter tells us, consider Jesus and what it is that he had to go through for us. The one who was given a piece, a lot of pieces. One was in a garden in which one of his closest friends betrayed him. Another piece was before a Sanhedrin that was meant to be for him, but instead they were against him, and they convicted him of a crime he never committed. Another was amongst the crowd of his people who he came to save, and they chose Barabbas over him. Another piece was at a pole in which he was whipped and torn and tattered for you and for me. Another piece was him carrying a cross part of the way up a hill to the jeers and the tears and the spitting, the name-calling of those, again, he came to forgive and die for. Another piece that ultimately would be him breathing his last. And all the while, God had the big picture that he was bringing together. And he says, consider him who went through all of that for you. Get some perspective. Yeah, the job may not be perfect. And yes, the kids may not be doing everything you want them to do. And you probably got some doubts. And you've probably got questions that you can't quite get answers to, and you're really wondering about some of these things, and you're wondering if you should even be here. And there's other things that are going on that you haven't quite figured out. All of it to say, this writer would say, consider the cross. Consider what Jesus went through for you, because nothing that you have gone through is in any way compared to what it is that he went through. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that who shall ever believe in him will not perish but have eternal life. And so let's keep having faith. Let's keep believing. Let's pray. Dear Father, we're grateful for your Son. Help us, Lord, to fixate ourselves on him. That's why we're here. And it's what he offers us in a relationship to you. It's not about any person. It's not necessarily about the circumstances in our lives. But God, it's about a grace that you've made available to us. And that grace was not without effect. And may it have a great effect in our lives as we lean more and more in you with the faith that we have in you. Help us to not grow weary, to stay strong, to not give up, Lord. And in due time, we'll reap a harvest that only you can bring about. In Jesus Christ's name,